We would like to start the final part of our wonderful day. So it's my very pleasurable duty to announce the winners of the UCD Zine competition. And before doing that, I want to thank the selection panel, especially Judy, Carroll, Dealy, and Helen Doherty, who evaluated and assessed these zines for us. And I'd like to say that the submissions were very different in style, but they all contributed creatively to the post-extractivist debates. And we have, because of the quality of the work, we have 2 runners-up and 1 winner. So it is my great pleasure to start with the runners-up. So the first, and they are equal, so there's no ranking, they're both equally good. The first runner-up is Tatiana Tarasova from Tallinn University for her Zine Rummy Quarry. And by the way, we are undecided in the team, is it a zine or a zine? So I'm going to switch between zine and zine, so okay, not to take any sides. So the jury found that this is a very sensitively conveyed story about the rehabilitation of a mining site, the Rummy Quarry in Estonia. And this was a marble quarry where the inmates from a nearby prison, the Muru prison, were forced into labor in the mine. And Tatiana's zine is a critique of the conversion of that mine into a leisure amenity for commercial profit. So it means that when you go in there, you have to spend a lot of money. So it is a well-crafted story arguing that post-extractivist rehabilitation of the environment should be for the common good. So congratulations to Tatiana Tarasova. The second runner-up is by M. Almazan from Rice University. Their zine is called I Wish Money Grew on Trees. I have it here. And when you look through it, you can see all of them as you come in. This is a beautifully crafted zine in the kind of the graphic novel style, which has a very clear and important message. It resonates with the history of art, with the history of film, comic books, and broader cultures. So it is a very engaging narrative with a very strong visual appeal. So I'd like to congratulate M. Almazan for producing this wonderful zine. And now we're coming to the announcement of the winner. The winner is Zaba Feliki from Rice University, who submitted a zine entitled A Zine About Extraction, Post-Extractionism, Climate Change, with the words extraction, post-extractionism, climate change struck out. And this zine came first because of the manner in which they produced a zine about the slow violence brought about by climate change and caused by extractivism, and how it infects indigenous communities. And this particular work draws attention to first world dumping, the waste dumped on poorer communities, and the zine presents a new future where we can use our minds to better serve the environment. And there's a kind of a striking punk approach. The jury found that this was a striking punk approach, but actually when I read this and looked through this zine, it evoked to me the collage style of Hannah Höch, who was one of the most significant Weimar collage artists. The punk approach and collage style used is in keeping with the culture of the zine as a confrontational art practice. So this work is thoughtful and provocative, and it offers a message of hope. So congratulations to Zaba. Okay, and now I'm going to hand over to Judy Carroll Dealy, who will be talking about her wonderful interactions with us and responses to the project. So Judy has been the project artist from the very beginning of the project. She was also part of our trip to Estonia, and she will now talk about how, as a visual artist, she deals with extractivism, post-mining, mining, and all of that. So,
thanks very much. Well, I'm delighted to be collaborating with UCD Humanities in this study. My artistic response thus far is called Capitalocene from a Time of Ambition. And it's a series of paintings, and it sort of started unwittingly with the visit to Tina Mine. Now, Tina Mine is a very small village in rural East County Galway, but it was the largest lead, zinc and silver mine in the 60s and 70s in Europe. But when I was visiting there, I was struck by the huge grey slag heaps. And also there was a tailings pond covering 100 acres. And dotted about were pools of metallic colours of orange and pink. And then there was squatting about were rusted machinery, you know, and there were lichens and sort of vegetation growing on them, and they were leaking oil and residue into the ground. I kind of felt as though I was walking on a lunar surface. Of course, at the time, I didn't have a project in mind to make art out of. That sort of slowly incubated in my mind over the years, and I did a series of paintings about the mining machinery called Plantationocene, because those lichens and sort of vegetation, they seem to alter the form and function of the machines. And it's like as though they were a living species in their own right, that once were at the service of human beings, but now were sort of degenerating the atmosphere as they decayed. Well, when invited to come on board this study, I decided to further develop the Tina Mine experiences. And I did that in this new series of paintings called Capitalocene from Time of Ambition. Now, Capitalocene is a more global view of how capitalism and human commercial activity have sort of affected our planet and the environment. And I look on, and for these Tina Mine paintings, I used saturated hues and bright colours, because I was remembering the little pools I saw at Tina, and I was reminded of the colours of the planets in our solar system, and that led me to think about our own planet and about its lifespan and about our stewardship of the earth. Well, the paintings you see here are very different in colour palette, because I was responding to the paintings in the Ida-Firuma district in Estonia. And these paintings for me are going back to the local view and the local experience. Following that wonderful research trip to Estonia, I did have to change my colour palette drastically. The Ida-Firuma district is where oil shale mining takes place, and it supplies a lot of Estonia with its electricity. But since re-independence now, the government has become much more aware of the environment, and they're making a huge effort to use renewables such as solar and wind. But this blanched countryside, it seemed to me to be snowed under by mounds of ash, and the earth did not feel solid. But it had a sort of an eerie and, you know, sort of ethereal beauty. There are pale hills that are not hills but heaps of ash, and the trees seem to cling to an uncertain earth. And while some pools on closer inspection, they're not really pools at all, they're pits lined with plastic. And I sort of was imagining that the whole territory was gasping for breath for fear of overwhelming by ash. For me, there was a ghost thing in this territory, and perhaps the ghost thing is sort of a folk memory of an alternative way of living before the mining began, because this territory it's no longer suitable for agriculture because they had to remove layers meters deep of trees and soil to make way actually for the mines. So, like, I feel because of this, there's a kind of psychic wound emanating from the landscape. One can feel it in the way people talk about their home place, and it kind of reminded me of what James Joyce said in his preparatory note to Ulysses, how places remember events. And I think Edith Ruma struggles with the aftermath of mining and the legacies of mining as well. Now, these paintings are kind of my interpretation, my first impression of the Edith Ruma district. This painting here is called Cry, but it was too large to bring in, so I brought in this copy of it. And I'm going to talk about this in terms of compositional interpretation. There are several ways to look at a painting, and the one I'm most comfortable with is compositional interpretation. And if you want to read all about the ways to appreciate a painting, Gillian Rose's book on visual methodologies is a wonderful book. And she said that using compositional interpretation, one can develop a sort of connoisseurship, sort of what's called the good eye, you know, over a lifetime of looking at paintings. And with this tool, you look at the content, the colour, the spatial organisation, the light, and the expressive feel. Now, the content, of course, is what's in the painting, and the colour is the palette, like the artist has chosen. The spatial organisation, like, encompasses the perspective and how the things in the painting are arranged. And light is where the light source is coming on, and the subsequent sort of shadows and lights. And then the expressive feel, which is the part that I love, is that elusive thing, the feel, tone or atmosphere of the painting. And I would say that that's very subjective, both in the eye of the artist and the viewer. Now, when it comes to these 5 elements that make viewing a painting comprehensible, they differ slightly from what goes into making a painting. Like, included in that would be line, colour, texture, and all, tone, and all that. But there are a lot of crossovers. But the element I feel, though, that's most important is the expressive feel. You see this painting here, it's Goya's Saturn devouring his son. Well, when I was a small child, the art teachers gathered us all around to look at this big tome, and this painting was open on top. And I was very young, small and polite, but I slammed the book shut. I was so horrified, by it, because I knew even then that this just wasn't about the Greek myth Saturn, but it was about, it was a plain look at the unhinged state of Goya's mind. And this was in the time, the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War and of great social unrest in Spain. But to me as a young child, it was also every child's worst nightmare, kind of the ultimate rejection, being murdered by your mother and father, and worse still, being eaten alive. So I knew then several other paintings afterwards would affect me in the same way. So when I became a professional artist, I knew that expressive feel is very important to me. And they're linked to those 5 elements, but most especially to colour. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a group of artists, and they were called the Foveus, which means the wild beasts, by the art establishment, and that was because of the way they used colour. They used colour to express their feelings in their paintings. And Matisse was one of these, and he still is one of my favourite artists, Matisse. But I've used colour to express how I feel about these oil shale paintings. As I told you before, like, I'm after the ghost thing in this area because of the haunted feel I got off the landscape. In Cry, you may have noticed that the background is a painting made up of the map of the oil shale mining district. Now, I'm playing around with the perspective in this painting because we're also looking straight on at the vegetation and the tree. Now, an artist often combines their experiences, their multiple experiences in one painting. So, like, I saw this vegetation on the stop-off to the Capitalocene mine, but yet this pollarded tree was to the right of the mining museum. And I thought the pollarded tree was cut in such a way that it looked as though it's crying to the high heavens, you know, bemoaning its own plight and probably the plight of the vegetation in the area. So the feeling I get from this painting, as I said, it's subjective, it's one of despair and great anguish. So compositional interpretation is a great tool. Like, if you like a painting, it will help you to understand why you like it. Now, it might be one of those elements, but most likely it's the way in which the artist has combined the elements. Now, I like this painting here because I like strong colours, and a friend of mine said it's very enticing but toxic. And that's probably because there's a pink tinge of the pond, and the unhealthy, slimy green sort of strands seem to be striving towards the sky. But the colour is now, it's suspect, but it's solid, whereas in these paintings here, it's simply suspect. To use an Irish phrase, they look as though they've seen a ghost. And I have seen a ghost, I've seen the mining ghost. And these landscapes suggest a fragile, brittle earth reassembling itself following a trauma. So as you see, when creating a series of paintings, there are a great number of steps along the way. And at the beginning, especially, a mind map comes in handy, like words to do with mining and excavation. And then it throws up further threads to investigate. But I find I have to care a great deal to sort of immerse myself in research about a project. Paradoxically, looking, we were talking about sort of how to research earlier, and actually looking is a research tool, the most important tool, like, to the artist. For example, like when you look at something, you grow to love it and you grow to learn about it and know it. For example, like in A Still Life by Giorgio Morandi, you can see his rapt attention to the object. And you see a sort of a vase or a jar, it's not just an inanimate thing, actually it's a big load of atoms, and often a vase or a jar, it has its own aura or atmosphere. So you can see this great love in Giorgio Morandi's paintings, because he found these old jars and vases lying around his house, and he painted them in relationship to each other and also in relationship to the space around them. But what you're looking at is the love he had for these objects. Usually I like to experience a place or an object I paint at first hand. That's why I was so delighted to get the research trip to Estonia, because whilst there I did take photographs and later did drawings, but there's nothing to beat being in the place, getting the feel, hearing the people talk about the place, actually experiencing the place is the best preparation for painting. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Judy. That was amazing. And I'm so delighted to be able to see these in person after only seeing them online. They just take me back to Estonia in just such an amazing way. Thank you so much. Congratulations on the beautiful artwork. Can we have another round of applause for Judy, please? I'm delighted to be emceeing the final section of our evening tonight, which is going to be of poetry readings, and we're also going to have a film screening. So I'm going to provide a quick introduction to our readers for this evening in the order that they will be appearing, and then I will step aside and hand over the stage or the lectern to them. First up, we have Patrick Deeley, who is a poet, memoirist, and children's writer from Lochry, County Galway. His poems have appeared in many anthologies and leading literary outlets worldwide and have been translated to French, Italian, Spanish, Ukrainian, as well as other languages. Among his many awards for writing are the 2019 Lawrence O'Shaughnessy Award and the Dermot Healy International Poetry Prize. He also collaborated with Judy on the wonderful Mineland, which you can see on our project website. It's a beautiful video. And we also, am I correct, Judy, we have the facsimile edition at the back there that people can look through? That's right. Yeah, so, and you can see Patrick's poetry as well as Judy's art there. Uhuru Palafala is a senior lecturer of English literature at the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. She's author of Kerapete Khoisile and the Black Arts Movement, and she will also be reading from her most recent poetry collection, Mine, 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 which is published by the University of Nebraska Press. And Uhuru, you have some books at the back as well on display for people, so please have a look at those as well. Paula McGrath is the author of two novels, Generation and a History of Running Away, both of which have been translated to French, and the latter has also been translated to German. She is an assistant professor at University College Dublin, where she teaches creative writing, and she is my wonderful colleague. And she will be introducing her fantastic students to us. So I'll hand over to Pat.
Good evening, everybody. How can I follow Judy? I spent my whole life following her, kind of, you know. She's my better half. The beauty about it all is we don't have, we're not at loggerheads because she dabbles in paint and I dabble with words. So that's okay. Today is July 4th, a special day for Americans and so on. But I'm starting with an elegy. It's called Wetland Allergy. It's written in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010, which was, as you know, a huge calamity. I'm focusing on poems to do with mining and mines and damage tonight. This poem has a number of references to fairy tales. Fairy tales are troublesome. They can be very full of wonder, and they can be full of forbidden things, a bit like my childhood, so I put them in. And there's the clever fox reference, the frog prince, the magic porridge pot, and these are all by Brothers Grimm, as you probably know. And then there's the tale of Kai and Gerda and the Snow Queen, one of my favorites by Hans Christian Andersen. So I put those in along the way, but then things turn because I'm writing about the oil spill. Wetland Elegy. Each unfettered, undiluted fairy tale came true for me in a well, where wishing and not the wish fulfilled worked every spell. I chased a fox down a burrow, only to glimpse him again, up on his hind legs at mid-stroke evening, strolling as a man. There, in a leap, he reverted to animal. A river meadow sang me its prince, even if I croaked the frog's basso profundo. On the wheeze of wild geese wings, flurry of wild geese cries, I was transported with Kai and Gerda to meet the Queen of Ice. But today, oil bursting uncontrollably from under the sea brings back, amid these pastures drained for rye, the memory of skirting a quag's thick gruel and all that seemingly ran to living plenitude, as though Callows was a bottomless saucepan. Now, I reference Callows. I grew up in a Callows, or a Calla, the Irish word meaning river meadow, not a bog, but a place of rivers. These rivers were too small to carry names. There were 4 of them in our land, and we shared the land with neighbours. My mother was a farmer, my father worked at timber, and I spent my childhood basically in those Callows, so I learned a lot about them. And they intervened between me and the mining area of Tina, which was about 2 to 3 miles away as the crow flies. Tina was a constant presence throughout my earlier years. banging and smashing, explosions every 15 minutes. And as Judy referenced it, lead, silver, zinc, cadmium, and loads of other things were found there. It went from 1965 to 1981. This is called a bore. And don't say I'm called a bore. This is called a bore. It comes from 2 miles underground at Tina. And it's basically machines drilled down into the ground of Tina, which is East Galway's limestone, as you probably know, the flag plains, the glorious flag plains of East Galway. And in various areas, a profile would be caught of the earth down for 2 miles all around to determine the map of the mine site. And so these extended for huge distances down 2 miles. And I managed to locate one. When I was a teacher in Ballyfermot, I used to bring bits and pieces of the mine in with me because we had free access at that time to the mine, and then people got clever and they kind of walled off the mine. And the mine site itself, apart from what Judy told you about it, it was very interesting in that it was like everybody left in a hurry. Papers were strewn and machines were left lying about, things that you used later and that I used in my poetry. And bits of things like iron ore, raw iron ore. Well, if you want to, yeah. So just to pass that around while I read my poem. And this poem is called After the Mining, and I'm mindful I've got 10 minutes, so I'm not going to outstay my welcome. Thank you. After the mining at Tina. When I recall the wild meadow, silver and zinc won't regrow. A river flows uncircumvented through me here, where cyanide doesn't wash any more than mining lease or iron ore. So that out of the time spent on a thought, I reinvent daisy, buttercup, timothy, rye, clover and cowslip behind my eye. Let walls wed snails, bushes in turn lead to mated thrushes. Then earth mouth, mile deep mine shaft, dead landscape scalped and slagged, rusted air compressor caved under a concrete hangar, multi-flanged seized up generator, deranged stone crusher, all grow again, innocent of the doings of men. And in the derelict hall where some of us, born gullible, once credited a new strain of grass repasturing the mine. Centipedes and millipedes weave their own versions of love under a soggy carpet. Toadstools break through cracks in tiles. Mice make haphazard shredders of yellowed company ledgers. Say no ground is ever fully dead. Step a mound of musty weed. Find a mushroom pushing through the pickled plumage of a crow. Castigate my hurt, lack of patience with the dirt. Cite endurance of little things that are humbling inklings of a new beginning. Call it all a necessary process. I'm dreaming still, nature in place, though ages may come and go, and my dream not make a meadow. One of the most spectacular sights in nature, I think, is a murmuration of starlings, the so-called Blackstone, where they move in kind of great numbers in concert together across the sky, and they form or they perform parabolas and wedges and every shape in between. This poem is about starlings, as many of my poems are, funny enough, but more about starlings finding rest rather than in flight, and the ingenious place where they settle or hang out for the night. Starlings, bell sound, but not a call to worship or celebration, and with no rattle of alarm running along it, only a low drone which draws me on against the breeze through the late evening streets of this sleepy, rust-tinted Tuscan hill town, until I reach a small standalone tower, centuries old and begun to crumble, the bell within seeming to mingle a murmur with a snore. Then starlings, a few flitting, the rest tucked up tight together, the base of the campanile smitten lime-white with their waste. I want to linger, for in the deepening darkness I feel as if all the lives become one creature, and that the last bell to toll will be the bell of nature. Thanks to all the people here who invited me and for the wonderful time in Estonia as well. I want to finish with a poem called Species, which I wrote about 30 or 40 years ago. I've been writing poems for 50 years, would you believe? It's crazy. I'm going to stop now, I promise myself. And I used to stay up all night writing poems, and I used to go in and do brilliant days teaching in Ballyfermot afterwards, because there was no hang-ups. You know the way you had energy when you're young? You people are all young. Anyway, Species is really about the colours of the wetland meadows I referenced earlier. I think it was something like 48 or 50 different types of flora found in every square foot. It's one of the most wonderful and fecund, if I can use that word, one of these most fecund environments you could imagine. And of course then local people began to sink wells and to extract, and rivers got drained. The Galway County Council have a lot to answer with the V-shaped river. The rivers overflow to make the callows, that's how it happens. But when the rivers are V'd down into the ground, they don't overflow anymore, and a lot of the wonderful things that were there, the craigs and the eels and all of those things kind of go away. I was lucky once to see a migration of eels to the Sargasso Sea from the callows. Nowadays, they tell me, I've read somewhere, there is only, for every 100 eels that lived in 1970, there is now only one eel in the world. For every 100, it's reduced down by 100% to one. And when I was a child, I saw hundreds of eels flopping their way across the wetlands at home, heading off to Galway, to Kinvara, to hop into the sea and to go to the Sargasso. But that poem is that poem. This poem is Species. And I'll bid good night with this. Species. I might find them subsisting still, in soggy callows, on the sides of ditches, in old graveyards, those herbs, wildflowers, grasses that put the first spring in my step. I might pluck their names from an almanac: vetch, bird's foot trefoil, orchid, summer snowflake. Then to inhale the smells, be dizzied again, bear with grace what rash or hay fever was on offer. I might even bring myself to touch the last exquisitely dappled, boggle-eyed caterpillar, set a ripple running through it, shout my father back from the brink of ecological disaster, lead him by his grainy fertilizer hand to stoop with me there over wonders of cuckoo spit, spider and cowslip on a headland. Thanks very much.
Good evening. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this really excellent gathering. Thank you very much. My name is Uhuru Palafala. I'm from Limpopo in South Africa, and I am based in Cape Town. And I'll be reading from my poetry collection. It just got released in April. It's called Mine, Mine, Mine. It is a story about the story of my grandfather who worked in the mines, in the gold mines of Johannesburg. And it's an epic. It's a book-length poem in 6 movements. I'll be reading from movement 2, so bear with, because you don't get to hear from the very beginning. But I'm gonna read the epigraph, which I hope will ground you in the narrative. In 2018, a historic silicosis class action lawsuit against the mining industry in South Africa was settled in favor of the miners. Footnote: The miners are dead. Bringing legality into matters of state versus property reproduces colonial violence. How about land? What about white capital? What about black overlords? Some are still buried under mine shafts. An unpayable debt, no favor. An incalculable catastrophe explored in 6 movements. Movement 2. A vicious modernity disfigures black maternity, turns black women's wombs into factories producing blackness, wombs of profit and profits, birth canal strengthening GDP, ushering children into non-status, non-being. Black women's birth canals, domestic middle passages, forced to deliver sons into the mine tomb of the state. A dehumanizing project that traps mothers into obligatory reproduction to honor patriarchs, to honor capitalist duties, widows with living husbands, birthing sorrow and longing, youthful hearts gorged by grief under patriarchal oath and code of silence. We do not speak of our heartbreak, the depression, the inability to breathe, the lustful nights, the desire for flight, the foundering dreams of the city of lights, the unspoken rights to partake in the gold. We shall forget the newborn, the ones we buried and never talk about, the tongues we had to swallow in our mourning, trailed with bloodstains of memory. We shall master silence and forgetting, grieving but not crying. The present is a tough terror to swallow, a contaminated place to breathe, artificial in cemetery, windows broken by inherited shame, grief, longing, loss, spiritual dis-ease, the terror of leaving and never coming back, rageful outbursts of unprocessed grief, fermenting in the foaming mouth, swelling, inflamed, sprouting outgrowths. History is brewing in my uterus, fibroiding and braiding my past with a present that triggers minefields. Miners shot down, miners shot down. My mother's neurosis ruptures her psychic spleen, a mental hiccup, reflex gag, mineral heartburn of a tumor in the belly of her beauty, the mark of the beast. I am of her embodied grief, body an inventory of leaving, black rage in swallow, my skin a pathology of violent encounters, an inhalation of fabric intimacies, a memorial to enforced labor. How do you raise daughters to become widows? To be the most unmarried, married women, to mother without fathers, to break flowers in their mouth, to live with aftertaste of extermination. Well, they must excel at swallowing grief, kneel at the altar of duty, martyr themselves in their father's honor, be eloquently unsung, be obedient to loss, especially of self. Too many grievances spoil the rot. A calculus of black female death. There is no space for your tears here. Your depression offends me. The weak die before they are born, and girl, you're going to live even if it kills you. Do you know the troubles I've seen? Do you know what trouble lies ahead for a black woman like yourself? I need to toughen you up. I would have failed if I didn't prepare you for the world that's not set up for you and me, a system that makes cemeteries of us, that lowers coffins of our husbands in us, in our bowels, in our throats, sons that don't make it back, husbands that husband and father other families in the city of gold. We've buried daughters like you, daughters like us, for they've brought grief, won't even look at you. Young bulls are prized, boys, boys, boys. We were born widows into this condition that doesn't have a name, a mother without children, a neurosis of history. Sons and daughters were tortured in prison, chopped up and bribed by cannibals of the state, brain damaged by torture, then dragged behind a bakkie, disemboweled, decapitated, maimed. These bodies return to mothers and wives, unadorned by the national flag, to bright-eyed daughters and sons whose sparkling suns set before their prime. How do I receive their dismembered parts? How do I remember the dismembered? We are born in a blanket, come of age with a blanket, then the blanket of our womanhood, the gift blanket of our marriage, of our first child, second child, the blanket to mourn our miscarriage, stillbirth, not breathing under a blanket, the blanket you bring from Egoli, city of gold, a declaration of our love, the blanket to mourn you when you do not return, when you return dead, decapitated, maimed, disemboweled, the blanket of devastation to hide my pain and tears, incantatory sobs of a praying mantis under a blanket, a kanga, a macabre honor code of broken wishbones from sacrificial cocks, crushed by silence, burying violence, like seeds firing up future soils here and forevermore. I cannot breathe.
My wonderful students. We haven't laid eyes on each other until now. So I can only follow that up with a prosaic interlude. Thank you, Sarah, for inviting us, and to all the organisers for a wonderful conference. My very agreeable job this evening is to introduce the next three readers who recently completed an undergraduate creative writing module called Writing the Environment. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the module, and then I'll hand you over for some more poetry. So when the 2019 IPCC report came out, I went for a walk to Bull Island, which is the nature reserve near where I live. I go there often to work through writing and other problems, and sometimes find solutions and inspiration there. So on this particular day, I despaired and wished I could go back in time and become a marine biologist or something useful. And then I applied myself to figuring out what I could do with the skill set and platform I had, however inadequate to the problems. And it occurred to me that if I were inspired by this place, then so too might my students. Bull Island is an artificial or accidental island in North Dublin Bay. It formed from the silting processes that occurred when a second harbour wall was built in the 1820s. Tidal scouring of the bay led to the deposition of sand on an existing sand bar on the north side of the new wall. This was colonised by grasses, sea couch grass, and then marram, and an island formed. So it's a very new island, just 200 years old. It's a site that features often in Irish literature, including Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And it is an important and vulnerable site of conservation. So most recent sea level rise estimates give it about 70 years before it is submerged. And so I thought it would be, and it is, an ideal place for thinking through intersections of culture and ecology, past, present, and future, to the module's broader aim of thinking from place to planet through creative writing. I wanted participants to have the opportunity to explore the island and to meet and engage with scientists and reserve management. So we visit the island 4 times during the semester. We have an introductory talk from the Dublin City Council island manager, and a salt marsh walk led by colleagues from the School of Biology and Environmental Sciences, as well as a sound walk and another trip which focuses on futures scenarios. Out of these visits, students developed their own deep map, so it was very interesting to hear about the thick mapping earlier. So these deep maps will contain the usual physical and man-made features, but also different kinds of data, such as flora and fauna and cultural uses of the island, and very importantly for our purposes as writers, direct perception, so what the students saw and heard and touched and felt. Were they cold? Were they grumpy? Were they distracted by a dog with a stick or a dead gull? And the students then include any ideas they have as well, any snippets of conversation, basically anything at all that they want to put on this map. And by the way, they draw this map after their first visit, is that right? And it usually hasn't occurred to anyone to actually look at the map. So the idea in our heads of what the island looks like from walking on it versus what it actually looks like is quite funny. The shape of the island tends not to be quite accurate. They could revise it. So also in the classroom, students engage with creative and critical texts to learn to position their own writing within nature and environmental writing traditions. We consider aspects of the craft, so image, symbolism, character, voice, and so on, through the lens of environmental writing. We work with prompts and peer reviewing and workshopping, and we organise an end-of-semester reading. And I'm using the plural we because the module is very much about participation and engagement. It's assessed on a GPA-neutral pass-fail scale, which gives the students the freedom to explore the possibilities for them as writers, responding to an environmental crisis without this restriction or burden of improving or maintaining a GPA. So that is the module. It's my job done, and I will now hand you over to the students who will share some of the work that emerged for them over the semester. So please welcome in the following order, Wayne Johnston, Heather Slevin, and Rachel O'Sullivan.
So I'd like to thank Paula for that amazing introduction and for being such an amazing mentor and inspiration. And also want to thank the Arts and Humanities for inviting us here and giving this opportunity to us. This piece that I'm going to read for you today is called Yesterday, and it was inspired by the environment around us, both the physical environment as well as the emotional and mental environment that each individual person goes through. This is it. I seen a squirrel yesterday as I was waiting for the bus home in UCD. He was sitting in a branch of a tree, jittering back and forth along the branch while waiting for the cars to stop going by. He scampered down the tree, out from a bush, and he hopped across the road and stopped in the middle, for a minute or so, to survey his surroundings. He then continued on his journey and climbed up into another tree on the other side, where he vanished from my sight. I couldn't help but see myself in him, anxiously waiting for the right moment to arrive, and when it does, being in no hurry to get to where he needs to go. I seen an ant yesterday, as I sat on a wall eating my lunch. He was walking across the stone, marching back and forth as he advanced towards my sandwich, which was resting neatly in my 6-year-old Tupperware. He was just going about his business, searching for food for his colony. He stopped when he must have felt a slight gust from my breath. As I took a bite out of the ham and cheese, I found myself tossing a piece of the cheddar his way. He froze. Reasonably so, as I'm sure I'd do if Godzilla suddenly dropped a car-sized chicken nugget in front of me. It took him a minute, but then he went over to it, crawled onto it, feeling around it with his little antenna before picking it up and walking off to the raised patch of dirt behind me, where his home must have been. I stared at him as he disappeared into the dirt and green, back into the environment. I couldn't help but see myself in him, little fella just trying to get some food, to survive, taking help from mysterious places, simultaneously aware and yet unaware of so much around him. I seen a crow yesterday as I walked home from the bus stop in the lashings of rain. He was sitting in a tree, bundled up as the bullets poured around him, soaking his feathers. And yet he didn't move, didn't seek shelter to get himself out of that unpleasant situation. He rode it out as he sat there on that branch, shivering. I couldn't help but see myself in him, stubborn and unwilling to budge, even in times when, really, one should. I saw a tree in the field in front of my house every day. A tree that had stood for many years, that when I was young was a small sapling, a scrawny stick that in time grew to stand tall and proud in the ground he occupied. I couldn't help but see myself in him, growing into himself as time watched over him, as the environments nourished his roots and supported his trunk as he sprouted into a mighty pillar. A stump is all I can see now. I see a person as I stand in front of the mirror, looking back at me. He looks familiar, but something is a little off. His eyes stare blankly into my own as he lets out a deflated sigh. I can't help but see myself in him, and in his eyes, I see the knowledge of what is happening, see the helplessness of what has been done, and see the light slowly go out. Thank you. I'd like to open Heather up next.
Hello, my name is Heather Savin. I'm now going to my 4th year of English creative writing in UCD, and I'm so pleased to be here tonight. What I'm going to read is just a short portion of my deep map, which ended up being a huge cacophony of personal trauma and experiences and my connection to environment, and also a little bit about my experience working in the jewellery industry as a sales assistant. So I'm going to go ahead and read. The jewellery industry, yeah. Skerries, North Strand, cloudy day, post-rain, lunch break, hem of skirt dampened by sea, crumbs fed to the birds. June 19th, 2015, approximately 1 p.m. Where do you want to live when you grow up? Here. Here? Don't you want to go somewhere exciting? Amsterdam, Berlin, London? No, I want to live here. Sure, there's nothing out here. Well, it's home. Home can be anywhere you go. No, here is home. Home is where the heart is, and my heart is here. So you really don't want to go anywhere else? No, I really don't. I want to live here. And I'm really starting to mean it. I will live a half-life, a starved life, just to call this city home. Only the Emerald Isle. 13,000 years ago, a man killed and ate a bear near the River Shannon. Under the mound rests a history untouched. Danu calls her name in the winds, and if I rest my cheek to the ground and listen quietly, I can hear the patter of she beneath. Ireland once held the world's biggest hoard of pure gold. Bracelets, great-grand torques, rings welded with emerald stones, fine-cut rubies. I sell these same items over counter. You hand over your credit card, and I charge you €2,325 for one flat court wedding band with 0.5 carat Marquise diamonds in colours D2F, VS1 clarity and above, excellent cut, 1.8mm width, 50% band coverage in 18 carat yellow gold. This ring will go out of fashion in 5 years' time, and your wife will come looking for a plain traditional court when, inevitably, one of those tiny 0.0 carat diamonds falls out. We make the rings in our workshop downstairs, and I hide the order confirmation from a ring-making company based in England from your records. How I hate to tell you, it is all a farce. Our megalithic ancestors, they had a whole religion system before your Christ emerged, bloody and poor, from the womb of a virgin.